And as we've been covering in recent weeks and months, there seems to be a real coordinated effort and cover up to ram through a insufficient settlement where Norfolk Southern would pay $600 million, which is really just pennies to them, that the EPA and the Department of Justice agreed to. And today in Youngstown, Ohio, that settlement was rammed through, despite residents from East Palestine, Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, going to raise their objections. They were not actually let in the courthouse. They were put in a separate room. So they were not allowed in the courtroom. They were put in a separate room. And I was not there, but based on people I've spoken with, the judge apparently just had an agenda and had her ruling already basically decided before the hearing. Scott, I know you were there. Tell us, you told me it was a sham.
Yeah, Jordan, I'd like to take about, it's fresh in my mind, and I was let in because I filed a declaration with one of the attorneys. But first of all, Jordan, I want to say to Carly, and my heart goes out to all of the residents of East Palestine. And I never I just wanted transparency with truth and testing without the cover up. And each family had to make a decision, opt in or opt out. I told them I could never recommend that. But even a lot of the people that opted in that succumbed to the PR campaign from the plaintiff's attorneys, and Jordan, if it weren't, keep doing the work you're doing, because independent journalism is the future. There's very limited media coverage. But the way I would sum this up is the system worked as designed today, not as it should. And what I mean by that is that the billion-dollar company was protected and the elite plaintiffs' attorneys enriched themselves. And the best way, the billion-dollar companies get special treatment in courts, the way we don't. And it's very similar to like a JP Morgan Chase and the billion-dollar banks that do illegal foreclosures. Today, you witnessed a court and the plaintiffs' attorneys in Norfolk Southern basically foreclose on people's lives. And that's the way I summarize it. We would still be having this discussion. I want to be very clear. That whether it was an Obama appointed judge, Trump appointed judge, Clinton appointed judge, Bush appointed judge, we would still be having this discussion, because it is the system that is broken and been corrupted. The team I was with fully expected this today, but what we didn't expect is the behavior of the judge to be so blatant in support of the plaintiff's attorneys. The judge actually had in the courtroom her written decision papers. It wasn't even hidden. She read from them at the end. So this was a charade to make it look like it was fair. Now, for example, there's an attorney called Dan Abraham, and conflict of interest, the judge treated him totally differently. When meanwhile, the big conflict of interest is the captured EPA, the revolving door with the EPA people and everyone conspiring together. And Dan Abraham made a case that, Stephen Petty was handcuffed, and the judge literally came across the bench at him. But it is true. Stephen Petty was handcuffed by the court and complicit with it.
Stephen Petty is one of the whistleblowers you've worked with now. It sounds very unusual to me, and frankly scandalous, that a judge would approve a settlement without. Has the judge seen his data? What is the judge approving a settlement based on? It seems only the EPA's data.
I don't know. It's under a protective order that the judge put his data under. So I'm not sure why it is under that order and what the problem is with getting that information out. I know that Stephen Petty was very brave to come forward and talk to us and provide an affidavit or a declaration, as he did. But he was quite bothered by a number of things. The Dr. Arch Carson, nothing to see here. video that was put out to residents in a seemingly PR stunt.
You have evidence that the EPA is hiding data that shows significant contamination.
Correct. And it's, and it's Norfolk Southern contractor data. So the EPA claims to the public they're in charge and have oversight when they, in my opinion, do not. Jordan, I want to point out for you and the viewers something I witnessed in that courtroom today that, that I'd never thought I'd see in the United States of America. It's like Venezuela or something. A resident, when the judge just was ruling in favor and all that, a resident stood up and said, and looked at the plaintiff's attorneys and said, "You're liars." Now, I've been in courtrooms before. Usually the judges will say, "Hey, please sit down. I know you're upset. This is not the place." That judge stood up, looked at the U.S. Marshals and said, "Put her to the pavement." And there's no cameras. I wish there was a camera. You're not going to capture that in a transcript. And then that judge stood up and looked at all of us in the courtroom. Anybody else who's next? That's not the United States of America that we expect. This is something that happens in third world countries.
So the plaintiff's attorneys who are supposed to be fighting for the residents, they put forward this Dr. Chip Carson. News Nation didn't mention this in their report. He worked for Dow Chemical. He worked for Enbridge. He worked for Exxon. This is not a independent doctor. He's a fossil fuel guy. He's who the fossil fuel companies go to basically put out public relations, not facts. And Chrissy,
they actually
what's crazy about
in court today.
Go ahead. Tell us about that.
Addressed why they had Chip Carson put that statement out was because of all of the fear mongering amongst residents. That's why they put.
So it was the plaintiff's attorneys who basically said that they put that out because of the fear mongering.
Yeah.
So Chrissy, that is quite the change of tune from the plaintiff's attorneys, who, from what I saw just earlier this year, were saying there's health problems in East Palestine and Western Pennsylvania. We're saying that it's contaminated, to then half a year later or almost a year later saying, I don't know if they said fear mongering, but basically saying there's nothing to see here. How do you change from there's health problems to there's nothing to see here?
Almost $200 million and selling your soul. I hope it was worth it to them, and because one day, justice will be served. It may not be in this lifetime, against their change of tune and their lack of integrity. And I hope they can buy some of that with their quick cash grab. And it breaks your heart. It does. I know that the judge said that the residents needed immediate help, quick help. And I do. I know. I'm waiting. I'm being forced back to that house. So I know that people really do need that money. But those attorneys, they were supposed to be fighting for us. I don't know if she fully has seen everything. I thought that hearing would be that she was presented all the evidence and that the residents that were in that hearing would get all the evidence. And I was hoping for Steve Petty's test results, because those are people's homes. They have a right to know.
So the judge shocked me. She was so blatant. And so it's as if the plaintiffs wrote her decision. She had the paper and she read from the script while giving the appearance. And again, the plaintiff's attorneys stood there and said, unprecedented $600 million. But what's extraordinary is their $200 million in a year. That's what's extraordinary. They leave that out. But what also I'm hopeful about is the EPA is at the center of this with their corruption, because you had Norfolk Southern. There's some very specific things that the judge ignored in Stephen Petty's sworn declaration and mine.
In a very diplomatic way, my reading of Stephen Petty's sworn testimony, because I've personally had to state things under a gag order, and you have to be very careful. But my reading of it is the EPA lied. He says he doesn't say that, but he's basically saying that by misleading. And he's basically saying the EPA and other entities either intentionally or just through incompetence fucked up in terms of where we should be looking for chemicals, where the evacuation zone, and who and where is affected. That has to be very concerning, considering you're young and have lost your hair. You know other women who have lost their hair in your area, and you know a lot of other people with health symptoms who are not in the quote unquote evacuation zone and whose government officials are not even responding to them.
And it is concerning. And from what I've learned about these chemicals is, as the night cooled, I think that he meant that it shouldn't have been done at night, because as the cool air of the night settled to the ground and went into the valleys, they wouldn't have stayed put wherever that plume was. They would have continued to move along the ground and settle into the valleys and stuff around here. A set way to see. I don't think that you can depend on background samples at this point from anywhere in the area, because that stuff burned and the wind's directions were everywhere. I think that that's right, that they're using that data to make an informed decision.
Norfolk Southern doesn't have to cover like lifetime health care for residents, lifetime testing. I believe it's within a certain amount of years they have to contribute to testing, and then that's it. Well, why do you think they wanted to settle so quickly? Could it be that they want to get out for as little as possible before cancer rates surge? What are your thoughts on that, Leslie?
I really think that this was a very rushed settlement. We all see that happen so quickly. But what this community needs, because they are suffering and they are going to continue to suffer, is a program like they have with 9/11 survivors and burn pit survivors, where they have the medical care and medical monitoring for life. And that's what needs to happen. But those things don't happen overnight. That's a government process. So this settlement, another thing I wanted to say about the settlement too, is I noticed that the plaintiff's attorneys in their objection to, or in their motion for final approval of this settlement, they were responding to some of the opposing attorneys' motions. And one was that Stephen Petty's results were not released, and all they said about that, it was under a protective order by the judge. The other issue that they spoke to was that there wasn't enough information out there due to the EPA not properly collecting data with the aspect airplane that first week after the derailment and all the fires. And oddly enough, the plaintiff's attorneys shot that reason down and went only on what the EPA said in their talking points. So they said that well, they didn't fly because of the weather. And we've already dismantled that whole excuse. And they also said that Robert Crowell was a quote unquote discredited whistleblower. And I'm thinking, who told you that? So anyway, I sent my own declaration yesterday to one of the opposing attorneys, so it would be filed in court, saying Robert is not a discredited whistleblower. In fact, there's an EPA OIG investigation that's still ongoing. But I mean, I was very disappointed to see that they would just go off whatever the EPA told some of the friendly media sources to determine that everything that this man has risked himself to come out and say, just like Scott, here we go smearing somebody. It just wasn't right. So That's now in the court records that Gap came out and said, no, this guy is not discredited. You can't discount the fact that this data was never collected for these people during the worst of their exposures.
So to be clear, just like a lot of people think, oh, that's terrible about that mass shooting, but that will never happen in my town. Well, it can. And in this case, if you're in the wrong city at the wrong time, we're showing you the government's not coming to save you. They're coming to bury it. That's my ending soapbox. Scott, any?
No, and you well said, Jordan. And that playbook, I mean, you know, as a journalist, I mean, I almost think it's media malpractice to even put a headline out of that. I noticed, I mean, I'm not being critical, just true that Artemis should know better. I talked to her about East Palestine. They wouldn't cover it. And I don't know how. In the problem with some of these journalists,
they're not doing journalism, Scott. They're doing stenography.
Public relations. They do as they're told with the undue influence. That's why I'm telling you, the court of public opinion, we don't give up, because there's evidence here, unlike I've ever seen, and we're going to win this in the court of public opinion. That's why Why do you think the plaintiff's attorney joined Norfolk Southern and the EPA with all the smears and all the attacks? It's a badge of honor, and I gladly wear it. And I'll end with this. You know, I have children and grandchildren. Our children aren't going to remember us for how much money we made it in. They're going to remember these times and who stood to do the right thing to help your fellow citizen. And you know what? People, you know, if you stand on principle, you'll be remembered for doing the right thing, because that's what's life all about. And all these people that sell out everybody for their own financial gain, they're going to karma in the universe will hold them accountable.